Star Trek has a rich and vibrant history, but what's always surprised me is how little each individual Trek fan knows of its history, either knowing little bits and pieces or believing myths that have cropped up that have no basis in reality. The Trek fan base deserves a comprehensive retelling of how each of the Star Trek series and movies came to be, and in this series, I'll endeavor to do just that. Hello and welcome to Backtrek, a web series that focuses on the background information of any given topic in Star Trek. In today's episode, we're taking a look at the years between the end of Star Trek the original series through Star Trek the animated series, right up to the beginning of Star Trek the motion picture, and the behind-the-scenes drama that plagued these disparate years. Please note, having originally done this video as a multi-part series on this channel in its very early days, I thought I'd go back, rewrite, re-record, and re-edit those videos with some awesome new updates I've learned since I originally had made them. But for any story to make it into this video, I had one requirement: that it be confirmed by 3 separate sources connected to the show itself. Sources include all the autobiographies of the original series actors, interviews of the cast and crew of Star Trek, as well as things such as memos and journal entries, just to name a few. So, as you can imagine, it was a lot of work putting this video together. Anyhow, sit back, relax, and pet your friendly Sailot.
I try out. What if I'm not a true Vulcan like they say?
And I hope you enjoy the video. On January 9th, 1969, Star Trek was done. After what the network viewed as poor ratings, the series was finally cancelled. Reaction to the cancellation was surprisingly quiet. There were no letter-writing campaigns or bumper stickers being posted everywhere. This time, it seemed like no one cared if Star Trek would be around at all. Thanks to a deal struck with Kaiser Broadcasting back in 1967, Star Trek would continue to see all of its 79 episodes broadcast daily on their UHF television stations. This meant extreme exposure for the series. Now, people who had loved the show could tune in daily to get their Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and company fixes, while those people who had never given the show a chance could tune in and begin to love the series that they had originally written off. The fan base had truly begun and had begun to grow at a rapid rate.
I'm in Florida, where immediately upon landing, I'm glad-handed by a pair of aviator sunglassed NASA representatives and shoved into a Jeep. I'm then shuttled off to NASA's Cape Canaveral, where I've been assigned the task of serving as the surprise guest at a party honoring 1,000 of the agency's staff engineers. And toward the end of the festivities, I'm introduced. I emerge at last from behind that curtain, and I'm stunned by the thunderous ovation that greets me. These guys are literally standing on their chairs cheering. To receive this sort of overwhelming reception was beyond belief. Somehow, it just didn't seem credible that a make-believe space explorer should merit the center of attention amid these real-life heroes. My spirits had been buoyed tremendously by the events of the day. For the first time, I'd seen irrefutable proof that, despite Star Trek's mediocre Nielsen numbers, the series was truly appreciated. Star Trek, I mused, was going to be around for a long time.
After Star Trek's cancellation, all of the cast had to go job hunting.
I did a couple of musical plays, some TV work, some nightclub shows, and then, leaping from a 23rd century astronaut on a starship to a 20th century madam, I created the gutsy, foul-mouthed Dorinda in the Isaac Hayes film Truck Turner.
Tom Bradley, my city councilman, was the new mayor of Los Angeles. Friends in the political arena began suggesting something I had never considered: running for that vacant seat on the city council. I decided to declare myself a candidate. I loved campaigning. I went door to door, talking to the voters in their homes. After trading places in the lead, I ended up coming in second, losing the race by a heartbreaking 1,647 votes.
A short time after we finished shooting Turnabout, I signed on with Mission Impossible. It was exciting, at first. My character, Paris the Great, was a master of disguise. Therefore, I got to play a multitude of characters. Old men, Asians, South American dictators, blind men, Europeans. And Mission was refreshing television for the time because it was very cinematic. In fact, the third script Paramount submitted to me was a beauty. In it, I played a revolutionary leader loosely based on Che Guevara, and in general had a marvelous time with the part. But then, before I knew it, I was playing the South American dictator again, and the Asian, and the old man, and the blind guy. It got boring. Midway through my second season, I finally realized I had done it all, and the fun had begun to wear thin for me. A short while later, I left the show.
In order to continue to have some sort of income, William Shatner would return to theater, performing, touring the United States with a small acting troupe.
Over the course of the next several years, I was lucky enough to keep busy as an actor. Some of the roles I guest villain shot on Columbo, featured spots in shows such as Name of the Game and Mission Impossible, quite good. Others like Hawking Promise Margarine all over television or Battling the $6 Million Man were equally bad. Still, with a lot of hustling, I was able to keep my head above water. The bills got paid, my kids stayed fed, Morgan got fat, and my post-Trek life moved forward without regrets.
By the end of 1969, Star Trek was already beginning to make its resurgence. The cancellation had and would ultimately become the best thing that had ever happened to Star Trek. You see, thanks to its third season cancellation, Star Trek was being remembered as a good show that was axed by a bad network. If Star Trek hadn't have been cancelled, continuing to pull down ratings and offending its fan base, there was a good chance that Star Trek would have been remembered as a bad series, and as such, would never have even made it into syndication at all. But instead, the cosmos were kind, and Star Trek was flourishing in its new UHF environment. By 1972, finally, the Star Trek convention was born. Gene Roddenberry would enthusiastically attend these events. He himself, also having difficulty finding steady work, was thrilled to discover the droves of fans Star Trek was still picking up. Roddenberry would actually address the fans, having a sort of question and answer period, where fans could ask him specific questions about specific episodes, and Roddenberry would always have an answer, even though from convention to convention, those answers would often contradict each other. It was truly an amazing time for Star Trek. Roddenberry was also a very shrewd man. When these conventions started popping up everywhere, he was actually approached by Paramount, who wanted Gene to revive the series with either a made-for-TV movie or even a small-budget motion picture, but Gene would always refuse. You see, Gene had theorized that Star Trek's growing resurgence would continue with the passing of each year, and fans' desperate cries for new Star Trek year in and year out would eventually put Gene in a much better position to negotiate with the studio. And thanks to a brilliant clause in his contract with the studio, he knew that Star Trek could only be revived if he approved it. And so he held out. But he did make an exception. When Filmation approached Gene to make the animated version of Star Trek for television's Saturday morning lineup, he jumped at the chance. Star Trek could be introduced to a younger audience that way, still ensuring the fan base's growth as the years went on, and with Filmation giving Gene full creative control of the animated Trek, Gene Roddenberry took that plunge. But not everyone was happy with Gene. First, many of the original production staff of the show were horrified to find out when they were invited to conventions that Roddenberry was taking credit for their creations within the show. Suddenly, Roddenberry was Star Trek, claiming he created things like the Klingons or Spock's hand gestures when he had done nothing of the sort. Second, the actors were equally unimpressed with Roddenberry for very different reasons.
You see, throughout the primetime run of Star Trek, the weeks before Christmas would invariably find the show's editors digging through mounds of discarded film clips, searching for all the season's more humorous outtakes. Then they'd assemble the funniest moments into a collection that would ultimately find every cast member playing the fool. It was private footage. Anyway, the editors would put music to the stuff and premiere it at our staff's Christmas party. The clips were to be unreeled, enjoyed, destroyed, and forgotten. Obviously, somebody had allowed them to leak out of Paramount's vaults. Somebody was Gene Roddenberry. Gene, struggling through some tough post-Trek years and desperately committed to feeding the public's inexplicably ravenous appetite for all things Star Trek, had pushed his actor's foolishness to the surface in public. Gene would continue to cash in on the blooper reels for years to come. It was a tool that would help see Roddenberry through some of his leaner years, and one that would also damage his relationship with Leonard Nimoy. Leonard explains. The whole thing really bothered me, and I actually filed an injunction with SAG against Roddenberry on the issue of this stupid blooper reel. I was so angry that at one point I even wrote Gene an impassioned letter in which I said, Gene, what this is really about is creating an atmosphere on the set wherein an actor cannot take a chance on making a mistake, lest that piece of footage someday be used in some way that he had not authorized. I wrote, Gene, how would you like it if I came into your office late at night after you've been struggling at the typewriter all day and pulled out all your crumpled, rejected ideas out of the wastebasket and published them as Gene Roddenberry's bloopers? The upshot was Gene offered me my own copy of the blooper reel. He just didn't get it.
Even with his failing relationship with Roddenberry, Nimoy agreed to reprise the role of Spock on the new animated adventure, then titled Star Trek: The Animated Adventures of Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek. Doesn't exactly flow off the tongue now, does it? But in fact, most of the original cast would return to voice the characters that they had all made so famous in the live-action series. Actually, the return of Nichelle Nichols and George Takei would be thanks to Leonard Nimoy himself. In a bid to keep costs down by Filmation, they had elected not to include those characters in this new production, instead having James Doohan voice the new helmsman named Erix, and having Majel Barrett voice the new communications officer named Maress. When Nimoy heard this, however, he was livid, and refused to take part in the show unless Takei and Nichols' characters were included. And because of Spock's popularity, Filmation relented, and these two important Star Trek fixtures were included in the animated series.
Perhaps because I had already been left out of the animated series and only found that out when a fan informed me of it at a Star Trek convention. Dorothy Fontana had given a talk at the convention where the announcement was made. Apparently she and Gene had gotten their signals crossed, each thinking the other had told me. Learning it from a fan was quite possibly the most embarrassing Star Trek moment I have ever had. When I mentioned to Gene how awkward it had felt, he dismissed my complaint with a display of irritation.
So instead, Walter was given the job of writing an episode for the series, penning the episode The Infinite Vulcan. Other cost-saving measures included using the secondary voice actors to voice almost all of the other characters that would appear in the show, with very few exceptions. Also, to save money, the series would often reuse already animated cells. This meant that oftentimes an officer in the background would pop up for a few seconds and then be gone, or one of the main characters suddenly had a totally different tunic color while he recited his dialogue. Another measure to cut costs was to have the characters placing hands over their mouths while they were talking. This negated having to have the characters' mouths being animated. The show also introduced a handful of new, never-before-seen technologies, such as the recreation room, an idea that would become the holodeck in Star Trek The Next Generation, and the life support belt, an idea that would be completely scrapped after the series. Already established sets and equipment would once again reappear in the series, though some would see some minor changes. The bridge, for example, would see an addition of a second turbolift beside the main view screen. And the perimeter bridge consoles would become rounded, producing a perfect circle on the bridge instead of its original angular design. The animated series would also provide Uhura the rare instance of flexing her command muscles when in the episode The Lorelei Signal, she valiantly takes command of the ship from Scotty. In that episode, we also get to see an all-female security team, something shocking at the time, but would further Star Trek's image of being socially responsible with looks to the future of humanity. The series was so popular that even an anti-pollution public service announcement was created for the non-profit organization named Keep America Beautiful, featuring the animated series characters and original cast voices. The ad ran on Saturday morning programming during the entire series run. Star Trek the Animated Series ran from September 1973 to October 1974, containing 22 episodes split into 2 seasons. Dorothy D.C. Fontana, a legendary woman for Star Trek in her own right, would return to Star Trek the Animated Series as co-producer and story editor. And for many, these 2 years of animated Star Trek are seen as the last 2 years of Kirk's original 5-year mission. The question of the animated series itself being canon or not would finally be put to rest on June 27, 2007, when Paramount's official Star Trek website would include the animated series in its library section, declaring officially and once and for all that Star Trek the Animated Series was indeed canon. Star Trek the Animated Series was well received by the public. Though geared towards children, it was no surprise that a large chunk of audience was that of original series Star Trek fans. And at the Emmy Awards for the 1974-75 television year, Star Trek the Animated Series would win the Emmy Award for Best Children's Series. This was the first Emmy won for the Star Trek franchise. With his contract for the animated series with Filmation complete, Gene Roddenberry now turned his attention to Star Trek's next step in its evolution, a new live-action series he tentatively titled Star Trek Phase 2. Phase 2 was intended to bring the Starship Enterprise and her crew back to the small screen as the flagship show on a new network the powers that be were developing. But with the release of a little movie called Star Wars, Star Trek's future would end up on its first roller coaster ride that would lead to Star Trek finally returning as a motion picture, a movie that would both succeed and fail in one of the biggest oxymorons that Star Trek would ever create. But that's another story. Thank you for watching today's episode of Backtrek. What do you think of Star Trek the Animated Series and all the great little tidbits of information that I've provided you here in this video? Do you want to see more videos like this one? Well, leave your comments in the section below, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, hitting that little bell icon so you won't miss a single video we release. Want to help the channel continue to show its love of Trek through videos like this one? Then consider becoming a channel member subscriber or a channel patron. Both a major help that allows this channel to purchase resources and 3D models to keep it going. The link to both memberships is in the description below. Thanks again for watching. Live long and prosper.